Now, it's obviously no secret that Russia has the dubious title of being the most sanctioned country in the world. In your opinion, Zhang Weiwei, what effect do you think these sanctions have had both on Russia as well as the countries imposing them?
Well, I would say, Russia handled this imposed sanction rather well, skillfully. And I think this ruble for natural gas deal, this is very inspiring to many non-Western countries who are fed up with the U.S. weaponization of U.S. dollars and the financial weapons. And also, if we look at Russia's economy, usually in the West, they look at Russia's economy in U.S. dollar-dominated GDP. In fact, if you look at purchasing power parity, Russia's economy much bigger than it appears to be. It's almost close to the size of the German economy if it's calculated by purchasing power parity. So if the rest of the world continue to trade with Russia and China continue to trade with Russia, I think the sanction will not work.
Mm-hmm. And to what extent do you think China has benefited from these Western companies ceasing business with Russia, with China be able to move in and fill the gap in the market? And obviously, Russia is now redirecting its oil and gas supplies towards China, towards India. How's China benefited economically from these sanctions?
China and Russia have forged this strategic partnership for already many years. We have already the two leaders, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, have always provided guidance at strategic level, macro level, for the cooperation between the two sides, especially in the economic and other domains. And as a result, when the sanctions by the West imposed on Russia, which China is opposed to, it's only natural that Russia needs all kinds of goods and China can provide. In fact, China is the major supplier for consumer goods anywhere. And China is now the largest manufacturing power. Its manufacturing power is bigger than the combined manufacturing power of the West. So naturally, China can offer high quality goods and which Russia needs, other countries need. So this is about trade. It's only normal and natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, given China's closeness with Russia, despite the war in Ukraine, is China concerned that the country itself will be sanctioned? Indeed, I believe the US has sanctioned a few Chinese firms that it claims has supplied chips to Russia. Or do you think it's, given the fact that China is such a manufacturing powerhouse supplying the world, do you think it's basically impossible to isolate China in such a way?
Basically, the United States, yes, there was some talk of so-called applying the same kind of sanction from hell to Russia and to China. And perhaps it will be much more difficult with regard to China because China is, in fact, the largest economy by purchasing power parity since 2014. So since 9 years, it's really the largest economy. And it's also the largest trading nation. It's also in the cutting edge of new technologies, in many ways doing better than the United States. China also has the world's largest middle class, real middle class. When they go to the United States, they're also middle class. So there's no way to sanction this kind of country in such a scale as against Russia. For instance, if they say we ban Chinese or China or Chinese companies to use SWIFT, I'm afraid, being the largest trading nation, so we have to have this RMB, Chinese currency for Chinese goods. So the dollar perhaps will collapse overnight.
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed, there is a general move among many countries to do trade in their own countries now, including Russia and China with the yuan and the ruble. Do you think this has been caused by the threat of sanctions and countries are looking to isolate and protect themselves from that threat?
I think this trade in local currency, between China and Russia, and with other countries, already a trend, because the United States has weaponized the U.S. dollar. It's no longer a public good. It still plays some role of that, yet on the whole, it's increasingly weaponized. So this is doing a tremendous disservice to the United States. As for China and Russia, I think from the figure I checked, it used to be less than 20%. Now it's 50% in local currency, Chinese currency and Russian currency. So it's a good trend. Anyway, the United States weaponize everything, then it will, in Chinese saying, lift a piece of rock to strike on its own feet.
Well, the reason I mentioned sanctions, they were in the news a couple of weeks ago because the US accused China of perhaps planning to send lethal aid to Russia, weapons to Russia, something that both sides have denied. What do you make of those accusations by the US that China was planning to do that to Russia?
Indeed, this is fake news. China and Russia have strategic ties. We have normal trade and other relations. So this is only normal, but not the accusations made by the United States. I think their accusation is basically to tarnish the Chinese image in one way to consolidate so-called Western alliance. And so it will not work. Yeah.
Now, and well, China indeed has tried to position itself as somewhat of a mediator in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And indeed, it came up with this 12-point peace plan proposal that I think was fair to say received a rather lukewarm reception in the West. Now, I believe that when President Xi does come to Moscow, Ukraine will be top of the agenda with the talks with Vladimir Putin. If you were to speculate, do you think there will be any progress towards peace in Ukraine when Xi Jinping comes to Moscow?
Well, I think there is perhaps at this particular moment a window of opportunity, and we should seize it. It's essentially, most parties to the conflict now prefer a kind of ceasefire and political solution, which China also stands for. The only exception is the United States, which prefers to continuation of this conflict. Yet recently, if you look at the U.S. domestic situation, in the first place, its banks are in crisis. And then if you look at the package Joe Biden gave to Ukraine not long ago during his visits, it's only $500 million. It's pretty small. Which means what? If you look at the Afghan war, the United States spent $2.3 trillion. With this calculation, $500 million could only, for 2 days expense of war, in Ukraine battlefield. In other words, perhaps to a certain degree, the United States also somehow worn out or exhausted, and pressure on some kind of political solution is also going on. And that's my personal observation. If there is such an opportunity for a kind of ceasefire and peaceful talks, we know it will take a long time and a process. Yet, if we can start that, it's good for all the parties concerned.
Indeed. Now, there was. Do you believe that this impetus will also have to come from Ukraine's allies in the West, as this war's dragged on for over a year now? I believe that support for Ukraine politically in the United States may not be quite what it was at the start of the year. Do you think that both sides initially are going to have to push for at least some sort of ceasefire to start off with?
There is this possibility now because situations are moving fast. And so let's hope for the better for some kind of, moving towards a political solution. That's really because if the war is out of control, it will have a global implications for the economy, for the political arena, and if the whole more wars will occur in different parts of the world, in Europe, whatever. So that will be very consequential. It's better to let's talk to each other. That's better. And China can play some role in that. I'm sure about this.
Indeed, and it has already had quite, a vast effect globally, this war from Africa to Europe and further afield. And just talking about talking, there were some unconfirmed reports that President Xi Jinping may have a phone conversation with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky following talks with Vladimir Putin. Do you think that's likely, Zhang Weiwei?
I also read this report, but it's not confirmed by the Chinese government. Yet we cannot, say this is impossible. Why not? Because Chinese leaders, say Wang Yi and the Foreign Minister Qin Gang, also met their Ukrainian counterparts not long ago in Munich and in other occasions. Both focusing on a political solution to the crisis. China pursues a foreign policy of independence and peace. And I think China is in really, at this particular moment, a unique position to mediate between all the parties concerned. We have done well this time with the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which, to be honest, in theory, could be more difficult and challenging than the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, because that's really 1,000 years, if not more, of a kind of contention and conflict. Yet they have reached some kind of reconciliation. Hopefully, indeed, both Russia and Ukraine are China's friends. We hope, you will do well and eventually find a solution. Chinese position is very clear. We stand for peace and for development. The philosophy of the United States and many Western powers is always divide and rule. They try to split the world, and then they try to manipulate other countries' internal affairs. Chinese position is just opposite. Our position is unite and prosper. Let's focus on peace and development, and all will benefit from this. Having said that, however, China, I always describe China as a civilizational state. In other words, it's a super large modern state, yet with its age-old civilization, it's very unique and different from many other countries. And so with this kind of tradition, we can play some role, with not only political will, but also political trust with all the parties concerned.